Welcome to the knowHis.love podcast. I'm Father Michael, and joining us.
I'm Zach. I'm just Zach today.
Okay. Hi, Zach.
There's no. I think this is the first time I've been on the podcast without Molly.
How do you feel about that?
I don't know. I feel.
You feel alone?
Incomplete. No.
Well, if Molly can't be here.
Yeah. She's and in Kentucky right now. It's Sunday. She just finished up her high school youth group retreat. So she was playing the music there and gave a couple talks. So at least one talk. So she'll be home tonight, but later than I think either of you would have liked to podcast.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Are you the next best thing?
It's a long way down, but
Okay.
I do think that maybe it's the next best thing. There's a big gap between her and I, but maybe perhaps I'm the next best thing.
That's pretty good. One thing that Zach and I share in common is a love for J.R.R. Tolkien.
Tolkien.
I was gonna make that joke. That's so disappointing. What is it? Rolkin,
Tolkien.
That's a spoiler.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Lord of the Rings and all the other things that he's written, they definitely mean a lot to me, and I know Zach has been even more deeply diving into all of them. So we thought today we could talk about why they matter so much to us, but especially like Tolkien was a Catholic guy, and I would say they're very Catholic books, and they can kind of like point us towards experiencing God in different ways. So we're gonna just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I told Molly, she didn't know that we were podcasting together until this morning, and I was like, I tell you, I'm actually going to be your replacement today. And she was like, no. She's like, what are you guys going to talk about? And I said, Lord of the Rings. And she's like, you guys are such nerds.
It's true. But she and I did a Star Wars one.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So
yeah. And like I've become much more. I had not read Lord of the Rings until right after I graduated college, only about 4 years
that's
ago.
right.
So I'm kind of new into it, but I think that's given me like a perspective. But it's an honor to be talking to it with somebody who claims to know Tolkien. So no, I was going to make this joke later as well. It was all coming up in the first 5 minutes. I know. But I remember when one of the first times we ever hung out, I was talking about how like I'm really into coffee. I really like, as you know, I really enjoy like specialty coffee and making it from by hand and stuff. And I was like, I hate talking about coffee though, because I feel like I'm just the most pretentious I ever am, because like I feel like I like, just because I've learned a lot about it, that I whenever I talk about it, it makes me sound like I'm better than everybody else. And I asked, what's one thing that you think you know more than most people? And you said Middle Earth.
And I think you've said that makes you hate yourself.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's what I said. Yeah. I was like, I hate myself the most when I talk about coffee.
That was a good discussion.
Yeah. So I don't know. So it's exciting to talk about it. Like it's been really great as I've explored more into Middle Earth, being able to discuss with you, and so I'm excited to talk about it. Talking now.
It is a fun thing. It's there's definitely conversations that I've had about Tolkien and Middle Earth where I'm in the conversation like, oh, what are we? Like where you can deeply nerd out. But that's okay. We've all got things.
Yeah, we do.
And I think it's really good.
I think it's beautiful too. Yeah. To have stuff like that.
Yes. So you saw did you see the movies first?
No, I purposely waited to see the movies until I read the books.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what made you wait until after college, or like what brought it up?
I tend to do this a lot. So I love to read. And I really enjoy like good literature, and I understand that there are a lot of books out there that are very good. So I make it a point that like I want to read that, yet despite there being an adaptation or something like that. But I'm also pretty busy. So I like we were just before the podcast started, we were talking about Harry Potter. And I saw many of the movies, but I took like a intentional break from reading Harry Potter so I could read from watching all the movies from Harry Potter so I could read all the books all at once. So that wasn't until after my senior year of high school. And then after that I was like, oh, well, it looks like I like, Harry Potter's a type of fantasy, not quite like
Mhm.
Lord of the Rings. But I bet I'd like Lord of the Rings, and I'd heard people, even in high school. I remember someone saw them for the first time, and he's like, "Man, they were really good." And I just never grew up with them, so I was like, "Oh well, like I'll keep that in mind." And then I just kept pushing it off and off. And then
Mhm.
like I was busy and I was in school, and so I it wasn't until after my senior year of college that I actually read them. But all the while knowing like I wanted to see the movies, but I
Mhm.
wasn't going to see the movies until I read them. It's actually this is the same thing as why I haven't watched Rings of Power yet.
Uh-huh.
As I've wanted to read the Silmarillion, and I'm just like I'm into it, like about 100 pages or so, and there's still more to read, but I wanted to finish it before I watch Rings of Power. I actually think I've been convinced to not do that. Actually, I believe
Okay.
just so where everyone knows and if anybody cares, I will be watching the Rings of Power soon, only because like I've heard that it's even better to read the Silmarillion afterward, or like it would
Hmm.
probably make my experience of reading the Silmarillion even better, possibly, or vice versa. Watch my experience of watching Rings of Power even better.
Mhm.
Anyway, but so I waited. Yeah, I waited a while, but it was pretty cool to be. I read them through the eye of somebody who was in graduate school as a and studying theology,
Yeah.
which is something I'm sure we'll talk about. But like, I was able to understand um, a lot, maybe pick up on things that he was saying that
Mhm.
otherwise I wouldn't have if I read them earlier. So it was really cool to be able to do so, and then watch the movies. And that was an experience in and of itself. So
Yeah. That's some self-control.
yeah, yeah, or laziness. I don't know
Yeah.
which one.
I like it's funny to hear you say grow up with the movies because they came out when I was in
Fair
college.
enough.
But I mean that's the reality of things. But uh I didn't I'm trying to think. I read part of The Hobbit in grade school and didn't like it.
Mm,
Um but then I think I saw the first movie and then read all 3
mm,
of Lord of the Rings and then saw the rest of the
that makes
movies
sense. Yeah,
in college, yeah,
yeah,
because it was just like, "Oh, I love this."
yeah.
I don't like fantasy, really.
Oh, really?
Like, I like Harry Potter
Yeah,
and
sure.
some stuff like that, but I don't, like, seek out fantasy.
Yeah,
Like, Lord of the Rings is kinda like the blueprint of a
yeah,
ton of fantasy, and
yeah,
I really love Lord of the Rings, but that's kinda it.
yeah.
Um,
Well, then other fantasy I've read just like Lord of the Rings isn't really weird.
uh-huh.
It is. There's some weird parts, I suppose, but like other fantasy gets weird,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like well, Lord of the Rings like has that blueprint. They might take that blueprint, and then they just like go
Go all kinds of
crazy. Yeah,
places, yeah.
but
Yeah. I Lord of the Rings to me and and the Silmarillion too. The Silmarillion is
mm,
really way up for me, but they're like beautiful.
mm,
And I think maybe that's the thing that moves me the most about them.
yeah,
And what got me like I love the movies too, and like you can have every nerdy complaint about the movies
right.
that anybody wants, but like it all taps into this like, man, that's incredible. Like that
Mm,
longing and that beauty.
mm.
Yeah, that's the thing that stuck out for me. What was your experience like reading them, kinda just reading them straight through, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. It was interesting, and like it was very different than because I guess to a certain extent I expected it to be like Harry Potter.
Okay.
And the focus of Harry Potter is storytelling. It's all about the plot. And it's a great plot. It's very exciting. It's very easy to read. Lord of the Rings, it was like it wasn't quite like that.
Mhm.
I heard somebody recently compare Lord of the Rings to like the spiritual life, where there's like this like reading it actually,
Mhm.
like in the sense of like you have these like big moments of excitement of drama and that are really like that you just can't really put it down, and then you have like 30 pages of them just like walking
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um and like how that can be like somewhat frustrating, and that's frustrating to us in the spiritual life as well. And I think I did feel that frustration. I was like,
Mhm.
why are we still talking about trees? I want to get to the next part because like that was so exciting, and now
Yeah.
like I want to continue that. And I think like yeah, like especially in retrospect, like being able to like realize that the spiritual life isn't going to be just like this exciting battle all the time, or exciting new
Mhm.
thing. But even aside from that, though, I just think like my experience just being like uh, there's something so much deeper than just a story going on here, or at least this story is opening something up to me that like it's making me think in ways that I hadn't that you don't typically think when you're reading literature.
Yeah.
Well, at least unless it's one of the great books. Um, and it was just interesting, I guess, to be like, wow, this is so beautiful. There's so much more, so much depth here. Yet, like, this is a fantasy. This is fantasy. This is like a
Mhm.
this is a world that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Um, as opposed to like, I don't know, like reading something like Dostoevsky. Um, like there's so much beauty in his readings as well. But like it's also like, yeah, this is the world, and he's able to depict it. So Tolkien was able to like create something totally new, yet like with so much symbolism, and so much uh, beauty, despite it being something totally new. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
It and he even says it, like, when he wrote it, it was like he was writing something that happened
right.
because it was kind of a mythology that he was making up, and it tied in, like, that's a talking about the Jolkin Rolkin Tolkien or whatever. But one of the other jokes that I've seen is like, what's the first step that you do when you write a novel? And it's like, come up with a plot, and characters like, no, invent 3 languages. But like it came out of that, and I guess that's what maybe that's something that makes it stand out. It feels so comprehensive and real,
yeah,
and so that you can follow these characters, and it's like, oh, this is a really thought out world
yeah.
where good and evil collide, and there's beauty and loss, and it's
Mhm.
yeah, that's it grabs you.
Yeah, I've long kind of said that because I've like discussed with friends that like, what like the debate about Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and it's pretty, like, I think it's really incomparable in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
and like I think Lord of the Rings as a whole like just runs away with it.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay for us to acknowledge, and I think like even for someone who maybe hasn't read the books, because a lot of people haven't. I have a friend who she's like very well read, but has somehow never read Lord of the Rings, so she's
Hmm.
about to. And like I kind of told her like it is it's different than other novels. Like Rowling may be a better like edge of your seat storyteller,
Mm.
but like the comprehensiveness of the world of Middle Earth,
Yeah.
it just like it adds to the story in a way that like that I mean it has never really been done
Hmm.
again.
Yeah.
And he was the first person to do it, and it just that's what makes it so beautiful, is like there is like he thought of everything. Like there are really no plot holes, and if you think there's a plot hole, it's really not a plot hole,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
You haven't read the right appendix. If,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah. I think it's that combination of like the story is really cool,
Yeah.
and the characters, but also the fact that like there's a history,
Mm.
and even like people. One of the weirdest conversations I've ever had was I was in the Franciscan library, and a guy unprompted said he didn't like Lord of the Rings because it had wizards in it. I'm like, okay, um, but there is, even if it doesn't say Jesus in it
Mm.
or God, even like there's like a theology
Yeah.
in it, and there's clear good and evil, and there's clear um, heroism and
Sure.
sacrifice that points towards like there are things worth dying for.
Right.
That always strikes me.
Yeah, and there's clear Christ figures, several throughout
Yeah.
it. And yeah, I don't know. I always think about the um like the difference between Narnia and Lord of the Rings, and I think
Hmm.
you may have been the person to tell me, or at least we've definitely discussed it, that like um Tolkien didn't want to tell C.S. Lewis that he wrote it in like a private letter to somebody else, that he actually didn't really like the Narnia books.
Yeah.
Um, and if you don't know, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien were best friends, or very close friends at least. Um, and because of like the difference in how they're writing, like when you read, especially Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, you were like, oh, this is a depiction of the New Testament. You're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you can't miss it.
Hmm.
Whereas like there's so much more um, the symbolism, like that was more of an allegory, whereas Lord of the Rings is more just like it's just symbolism,
Yeah.
and it's much more masterful. And not to take away from C.S. Lewis, he especially because his nonfiction writings are
Hmm.
something we're going to be indebted to him for a long time. But like that being able to show Catholicism in a full but subtle way, has is really is like definitely a gift of Tolkien's, that like it can be missed, like, but it's
Mhm.
also like we recognize the beauty in it. Like there's so many, like, more probably majority of Lord of the Rings fans are not Catholic. I don't know, you know what I mean? Not
There's a lot of Catholic Lord of the Rings
yes, yes,
fans, but yeah.
but there are like, if you look at like the base of like the Lord of the Rings, like,
Yeah.
man, like the fact of like how successful Rings of Power was, and just
Mhm.
like how like well Lord of the Rings did, like there's still like people who are not Catholic are just like so all in as we are, and yet like they're able to recognize the beauty of it
Yeah.
without really recognizing what they're recognizing,
It has beauty, truth, and goodness,
Right.
and yeah,
That's why we love it.
that is kind of an astonishing thing because I can't read it without seeing the Catholicism and seeing the
Right,
faith in it,
right.
but, like, it's just good,
Yep.
and I think that draws a lot of people.
Um, what so I've always been jealous of you, in the sense that like yeah, I said I didn't grow up with them, but
Yeah.
you experienced them older. So I always think about like how I'm a pretty big Marvel fan now.
Mhm.
That's probably like, and I follow the news updates of like movies that are coming out, and I really enjoy like kind of like the whole world that has been built in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So like now I'm in my mid 20s, and like these movies come out, and I'm able to like appreciate them in a way, and like especially when Infinity War and Endgame came out, it was like this like big climax to
Yeah.
like all these movies that I the first one came out in 2008 when I was 11,
Yeah.
so um and then the last one coming out when I was like 21, I think. So like 10 years of like build up, and so my theater experience of Endgame was just incredible,
Uh-huh.
and I've always been jealous of you because you got to experience that was like your experience of Lord of the Rings.
It was huge,
Yeah.
like, so it was I think every year, maybe sophomore, junior, and senior year of college at Christmas time that a Lord of the Rings movie came out, and, the last the last one, a bunch of us got together and they showed all 3 movies in a row,
Hmm.
and, that was insane.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was it was a long day because
Yeah.
they
I
were, like,
bet.
the extended versions,
Yeah.
it was really long, but it was I I don't cry in movies
Hmm.
that often, every once in a while, but the end of Return of the King gets me, and I think back to that moment of just like, "Oh, it was so powerful,"
Yeah.
and yeah, it's amazing that that exists. I guess
Yeah.
amazing that the movies were made, but, I think even more amazing that, Tolkien could write and create this world that I care about that much.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I would say that, like, reading The Lord of the Rings changed my life in different ways, like, just how I think of things and how I see the world, um, and it's not like a it's not a theology book, it's not a devotional thing, but
Yeah.
it leads me to prayer, like, it leads me to think about God in a different way.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I think like my experience seeing the movies was much different than that.
Yeah.
I watched them with like a couple friends, um, like in a basement,
Uh-huh.
like just like, and it was interesting because I knew like the moment in the last at the end of the movie when Aragorn turns and says for Frodo,
Mhm.
like I knew like that was big for me. But in the moment, even I was like, man, I can't imagine seeing that like for the first
Yeah.
time in theaters. Like, and
Yeah.
I had no idea it was coming, but like, it was dramatic for me. But like, it was like, I mean, I can imagine that how big it would be. So like, in that sense, like, I had all this build up. I knew a lot. I knew how it ended even before I read the books. I knew
Yeah.
I knew that Frodo ended up not. We didn't
We
say
didn't
spoiler.
spoil
We didn't.
alert for
Yeah,
this old book,
yeah.
so if you haven't read it and you
Turn it off.
skip ahead,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know. Go read Lord of the Rings, then come back.
yeah. But I think when Frodo doesn't succeed,
Yeah.
I knew about that. So like there was some things that like I just had that were already known to me. So I don't know. I've always been envious of of you and others that have been able to like experience it all along. But
I'm glad I experienced it the way I did in that, like, the movie made it possible for me to read the book, that it was like,
mm,
"Okay, I get this.
mm-hmm.
I wanna know what happens," and then to just I really tore through it,
Yeah,
and I've read it almost every year
really.
since back then,
Wow.
so that was it's yeah, and I think to be surprised by it was amazing, and to I don't know, have the effect of, like, so, for example, Frodo failing
Mm.
is such a powerful thing of like he's given everything, he's come to the end of his strength and he can't do it.
Mhm.
And then kind of like divine intervention has to
Yeah.
help. And
Yeah.
but to to read that and then see it played out in the movie was really
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
bet. Um.
Do you
Yeah.
have a favorite character?
Uh. I mean, there's. Yeah. I mean, and he's either Frodo. I mean, sorry, either Aragorn or Sam.
Mm.
Um. And I think like they both resemble different types of Christ figures.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I've heard. I think Bishop Barron said. And I'm sure he isn't the only one to say this, but like that. Frodo, Gandalf, and Aragorn represent priest, prophet, and king,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is really interesting. But Frodo being the weakest one, being the weakest Christ figure.
Yeah.
But then, uh, like Sam seems to actually um, be a more another type of Christ figure that like outside of that maybe,
Mhm.
um, and just like he's just so reliable the whole time, and he just like is not corrupted. He's not like he all he does is want to be um with his friend and just go and sit with his friends and and just eat and yeah, just be with his family too. And like I think at the ending of him being with his wife and daughter like really resembles this like I don't know something. Again, it's like a different type of. It's almost maybe not even a Christ figure, but like a Christian figure of just
Yeah.
like, well, how do we live a life of Christ? And I think that
Mhm.
Sam does that, and his loyalty is quite like that. But I also just like Aragorn's just so cool.
Yeah.
He is like when you think of like a hero in any movie, like he is the prototype in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and then when he like and yeah, you just the I don't know. It seemed to me like all of the characters when Aragorn was around just felt more comfortable.
Mm.
Just felt more like we're gonna be okay,
Yeah.
even when they weren't
Yeah.
necessarily gonna be okay. And like when he comes around on the final battle, like when he like with the people that what are they called? The dead.
Oh
Um,
yeah, the Army of the
the
Dead,
army of
yeah.
the dead, like and just like the like sigh of relief that comes with Aragorn, that like this sigh of relief that comes with Christ.
Mm.
I don't know. So I think like trying not to over spiritualize it, even though Tolkien does it first, but like I think they're both just like really very likable figures.
Mhm.
That in very different ways.
Yeah.
Like Aragorn has this like this heroism, this strength, this something that's like always to be envied. But then there's also the just like the simplicity of Sam,
Mhm.
that like I long to have. Like I long to have a simplicity in which like all I want to do is just like hang out with my friends and smoke a pipe and read books and spend time with my family.
Mhm.
Like that's what Christ wants for us, but he also wants us to be strong and courageous
Yeah.
and fighting for him. I don't know. That was maybe a more of an answer than you were
No.
expecting, but
I think that brings up a couple of like the greatest themes of it of so like Aragorn as a king. Like whenever we celebrate Christ the King, I think
mm,
of
mm,
Aragorn because he's willing to lay his life down for his people. He's a healer.
mm-hmm,
Um
mm-hmm,
and I think there's so many moments in the book and in the movie where I don't, the movie makes it more of a struggle for him, but it's still done well. But so many heroes these days are anti-heroes. They're like that
yeah,
they're not really good.
yeah,
Um, and that's portrayed as a better story. But Aragorn, as even if he in the movies he's reluctant to take up
mm-hmm,
that leadership, he's still inherently good.
mm-hmm,
He's there's never a question of him um, being selfish. Like he's willing to do what it takes for the good of all, and I love that about him. But I think also the hobbits, um, just that simple life,
mm.
like that there's that's worth fighting for. That
Yeah, yeah.
like
Oh,
that
that's a good point.
the
Yeah,
whole war and all of that to like it's to preserve everybody, but like to preserve the fact that the hobbits can like drink beer and smoke pipes and farm and
yeah,
just live their lives
yeah,
is a beautiful thing because yeah, we stories can often portray like the lives that matter are the ones that are dramatic and eventful, and you have to be active in a certain way, but like to raise your family and to love your
Mm,
family and love your friends is a heroic thing too. And I love that the hobbits come back, and especially in the book, they have to deal with problems in the
yeah,
Shire, and but like they really just they want to get back to being who they are.
yeah,
They've grown and they've experienced things, but like but they want to they want to live that life of just like to be able to enjoy the gifts of creation
yeah.
that were given to them.
Yeah, and I think there's also just like a cultivating it, like as you're saying, this reminded me like a cultivation of their own land too.
Hmm.
Like in the books, this isn't in the movies at all. But I don't think you know, it's actually funny. I've actually never seen the extended edition of the Return of the King. I've seen
Oh,
the other two, but when I watched it the first time, it was like we had a little bit of a time restraint. So I still need to see that one.
uh huh,
We should do that soon.
yeah.
Um, but so I'm not sure if this pops up, but when they come back to the Shire, um and like Merry and Pippin have in the books have grown and they become like these like leaders
Hmm.
of the community, and it's like they were, you know, made into they grew so much in that time, of like in the first three books, that now they come back and it's like, well, I'm this is my community and I'm going to return here and cultivate it
Hmm.
and be yeah, somewhat of leaders here now, um and like still though living the simple life, and this could lead into a whole other podcast on like the beauty of leisure.
Yeah.
I something that I just like had never really thought about until graduate school, and it's like really been something that I've become quite passionate about. I've become quite passionate about doing nothing, just like hanging out with my friends, you know. But like, yeah, like I think there's something so beautiful about like the life of the Hobbit, that is so anti-American and is so anti like Western culture,
Yeah.
um, that like is yeah, it's worth fighting for, and it's worth our fighting for to like try to a certain extent like get back to that as much as we
Hmm.
can, and living in America, living in Western culture, you
Yeah.
know. But is there
So
any,
you
sorry,
go ahead.
I was gonna ask if there's anything that like uh either you, well, yeah, I guess the question would be like, is there something that stuff in the movies that like you wished was brought out more, or that from stuff from the books that you wish the movies did a better job of portraying, or something like that?
The one real complaint that bothers me every time is that the character of Faramir,
Mm,
because in the books he is a good man,
yeah.
and is sort of a counterpoint to his brother, who's a good man in his own way, but obviously struggled. But that Faramir is like he is honest and
Mm-hmm.
trustworthy and heroic,
Mm-hmm.
and in the movies they introduce a conflict
Yeah.
that wasn't in the book, and that these things happen.
Sure.
That's probably the big one because, uh, like I said with Aragorn, like it's refreshing and it's funny because this is an old story. It's refreshing to have heroes that are heroes,
Mm.
because that's not the case
Yeah.
often. Like a movie series I really enjoy is John Wick with Keanu
Mm.
Reeves.
Yeah.
Like it's an amazing action movies. Like it's so well done, ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
entertaining. But like in the end, he's a hitman, and he's just cool, and so
Yeah.
you root for him because he's. But like in the end, he's a hitman,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but like Aragorn and Faramir are selfless heroes, and so I think that's what's so refreshing about it in the age that we live in, and to not be afraid to be good, um,
Mm.
and even just like the friendship with the and I think this is portrayed well in the movies, but the friendship of the hobbits, the friendship of Aragorn and or no of Legolas and Gimli, like
Mm.
just
We
that
haven't talked about
pure
them. Yeah.
friendship,
Yeah.
is such a beautiful thing to see portrayed for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did like it. Like, you know, they portrayed Sam and Frodo's friendship as like, I mean, I'm sure they're like I'm sure like people have made it into so much more than it
Hmm.
was in culture today, but like just like the just like a real love that they
Hmm.
had together. And I think it may have even been on this podcast. I don't know, but I mentioned before, just like I had a moment like that where it's like when after every once in a while, like male like within male friendship, like there's just like this like a type of affection that like resembles that I think is portrayed really well in the books, especially, and in the movies as well. Of just like this, like it can be affectionate, but
Mhm.
yet like still holy and manly and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I've had experiences like that since, and I was like, man, I feel like Frodo and Sam.
Uh-huh.
But um, yeah, um, I think the one thing that bothered me, and it's funny, like I've actually been spending the last like couple minutes, and I'm blanking on his name for the weirdest reason. Um, the white before
Saruman?
Saruman, yeah.
Mhm.
I kept on wanting to say Sauron, and I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, I knew that wasn't right.
Yeah.
But he the way in which he dies in the movies,
Yeah.
which he doesn't even die in the books. I remember reading the book.
He does at the end.
Yeah, at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But as far as like in that moment, he doesn't
Yeah,
die,
yeah.
and like he yeah, when I remember reading the book, and like there was a few times when I was like been able to realize like, oh, this is like a really big, like it was a good symbolic moment of
Mhm.
Christianity. And like that when Gandalf calls up to him and he was like, Saruman, you can come back, like we can fix this, like you can repent,
Mhm.
and we can move on, you can help us,
Yeah.
and he says no. He's like, I'd rather stay here. I'd rather like have my little kingdom here, and kind of, and um and suffer. But it's my choice, and I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking in that moment, like that is the Christian life. Like God calls after us, but we can say no.
Mhm.
Like he can, they can come and repent. Like we can fix it. You can help me, even though you've done all these terrible things. And we just said like, no, I'd rather not do that.
Yeah.
And he just walks away, and then and Gandalf lets him.
It's kind of like I'd rather rule in hell.
Yeah, yeah,
S
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, but then in the movie, it just
No.
doesn't happen at all.
Takes away that
It
power,
does, it
yeah.
does, yeah. But it does. I mean, the point still stands. He says no in the
Mhm.
same way and but I always thought, like I remember looking forward to that part of the movie, and
Yeah.
then in the non-extended edition, you don't see it at all,
No.
and the extended edition, he falls on a spike, and you're like,
It
I was just like, what just?
Yeah, that's kinda lame.
Yeah, but
So you've started the
I
Silmarillion.
have, yeah,
So for people who if you're not familiar, the Silmarillion's it's kinda like almost like the Old Testament, to the Lord of the Rings New
yeah,
Testament. It feels very much like reading the Old Testament
yeah.
in that it's kind of myths and creation going to like prehistory, and it's a lot of
Mhm,
different stories. I love it.
mhm,
And particularly, and you've read this part already, the creation of the world
yeah.
in the Silmarillion
Oh
is
yeah.
beautiful.
I took a while to read it. I mean, it's not an easy read.
Hmm.
And but in a good way. Like I like it took me a while to read that 40 pages or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Because like it's just so detailed, and I didn't want to miss anything. But it's beautiful, and it is a bit more like you see a lot of similarities to like our understanding of the creation of the world, with differences of course, but it was, yeah, it's fascinating,
Yeah.
and there's so many names,
There's a lot of
and
names.
so, but like I don't know, like the part of me wants to like someone recently said, I heard like on a podcast or something, like he's a slow reader, and I'm a pretty slow reader, and he said that the reason he thinks he's a slow reader is because he's trying to everything he reads, he's trying to teach it.
Mm,
He's trying to learn it so much so that he could teach it.
yeah.
And I think that I can tend to do that. I'm a teacher, and so like I've been trying to read things faster,
Okay.
but because I don't need to teach everything,
Hmm.
you know, um, I'm not doing that for the Silmarillion.
Okay.
Like I have been like, not that I want to teach it, but there's just so much detail and there's so much beauty that I don't want to miss anything. So like
Yeah.
he says a name I don't remember, so I'll just like go back a few pages and like, oh, okay, and then
Uh-huh.
it's but it is, yeah, it's also just like it's just uncovering Tolkien's like just how good he is,
Hmm.
because this world is, it's so like it's not even like a like it's all just the background. You know what I mean? Like that's what
Yeah.
he's doing. It's not
Yeah.
doesn't push a plot forward really.
No.
Kind of does,
It's
but
like here's the world.
right,
Yeah.
right. And that's like that's just love of literature, you know.
Hmm.
But
That's made me appreciate. I don't know. I feel like I look at mountains differently, and the ocean differently because of that book.
Mm.
One of the really interesting things is that the world's created through music in the Silmarillion,
Mhm.
that it's sung into existence, and uh, a con- a reoccurring theme is that music sort of lingers in water, and so like the ocean has this call, like a power over the different peoples in the story, and um, almost like the kind of like basically God's power
Mm.
is there in a different way, and that's just such a incredible image.
Mm.
And even just like the shaping of the earth and the mountains, and um the joke is that Tolkien spends pages describing trees,
Yeah.
and it's kind of true. um but I think also it makes you really appreciate the that how the world shows God, how the world like represents the
Yeah.
creator, and I love that about it.
Yeah. Yeah, he seems Tolkien seems to have a very, like, deep understanding, it's very, like, kind of, like, middle agey understanding, like, if we're looking at theology, kinda like
Mhm.
their understanding of the world, just like, the emphasis was always just, like, that everything in the on earth is created to glorify God.
Mm.
You know, everything, even the rocks of the world, like it's not. I've talked about this before, I think, but like Saint Ignatius, when he was saying, when his big quote that he signed everything with, is AMDG ad majorem Dei gloriam, which is for the greater glory of God.
Mhm.
And like we've taken that recently and made a bit like everything we do it for the greater glory of God, and like that's not wrong, but like the way that he meant it was likely like that all of everything is for the greater glory of God. And I think Tolkien seems to have like a very deep understanding of that like everything in Middle Earth, everything beyond Middle Earth, and like is just all for God.
Mhm.
And like starting, I feel like I've just um cut into the surface of the Silmarillion, but like yeah, kind of like that the idea of just like how everything in the world, yeah, just basically what I just said, like the
Mhm.
and what you were saying about the music in the ocean, like um there's something just like so deeply beautiful about it
Yeah.
that he's able to flesh out in a way that that does glorify God, you know.
Yeah. And I think the idea that the world is good, created by God for good, but there's always a sadness that goes with it
Mm.
in this world, in the Middle Earth, because it's been it's been broken in some ways, or sin has entered in, and that longing that everyone has for like when things are perfect,
Yeah.
and that's real for us,
Yeah.
that we come up against human hurts
Mm.
and sin and tragedy. Like we long for something more. Like
Mm.
we long for a perfect world, and I think he really captures that mix of beauty and sadness
Mm.
that's just always going to be there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Mm.
Yeah, we've talked for like 40 minutes, and
We could keep going.
barely scratched the
Yeah, I know,
surface.
really. I
So
mean, we
maybe,
didn't. We barely even talked about characters. I mean, we talked about like Aragorn. That's kind of it.
yeah. So this is an intro. Next time Molly's out of town,
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
have
We'll
to
do a
do
part
a
two.
series.
Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
Um, as a final thought, favorite moment
Favorite
in Lord of the
moment.
Rings.
Um, I always think of. I think like when I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it's more of a full a little bit longer, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But just like I think the final climb up in Mordor,
Yeah.
up to the um top of the mountain to what's the name of the mountain again?
Mount Doom.
Mount Doom. That's what I
Yeah.
thought. Sounds a little bit too much like Fantastic Four though, so I wasn't sure. I doubted myself for a second. I should never have.
No.
Like, and just like the I I cried the most during that
Mm.
time, when and seeing like Sam's um like how much he was continuing to um the progression of Sam this could be another. It could be another like some, symbolic of Christ again. But like as Frodo's getting weaker, um, the ways in which Sam continues to sacrifice
Mhm.
until inevitably he ends up carrying Frodo.
Yeah.
And I think like that like is representing first of all like true friendship, true brotherhood, true love, but also just it also like that's what Jesus does for
Yeah.
us. Like we're trying to get to heaven, and we're but like Christ is the one that's like carrying us there the whole time. Um and I think like so I just think when that was when I was yeah crying the most during that time, and like just like recognizing the love that um some of my friends have for me too. I think that
Mhm.
was a real thing. Like, um, and but then also the love that that Jesus shows us. And then yeah, and then Frodo fails. I don't know, just something like really.
Yeah.
And it's also funny in the book. Like I knew Frodo was gonna fail. You can miss it. Like in the book, like
Uh-huh.
it is so fast,
Yeah,
and
it all happens very
yeah,
quickly, yeah.
and like I was just like, whoa, like this is like, and I think that even that I think that was on purpose. I
Mhm.
think I don't know, like by Tolkien of just being like that it's not so much about like the like that moment. It was about like kind of the whole 1,000 pages prior to it.
The sacrifice that led up
Yeah,
to that.
exactly,
He gave
exactly.
everything.
Right, and
Yeah.
then he couldn't even, and he didn't do it because Jesus is the one
Yeah.
like you said, like divine intervention.
Yeah.
You need to um just intervene.
Mhm.
But what about you?
I think, and it's in the movie and in the books, when so Gondor's under siege and like they're facing these impossible odds,
Mm,
and then the Rohirrim come,
mm,
the horse people that have like they're these great soldiers, and they've traveled like they won their own battle, and now
mm,
they've answered this call of loyalty
yeah.
to save Gondor, and
Mm,
just they come, the sun rises and they're blowing their horns, and they charge screaming death,
yeah.
which is amazing, um because it is very much like they're throwing themselves at this. Like they may die, and
Yeah.
lots of them do die, but they know what they need to do, and I think especially in this, my favorite part of the movies, Aomer, who's a great character, just, it's kind of a battle frenzy, but just he's charging with everything that he has, because like this is what they have to do.
Mm,
They have to save the city and save their
mm,
friends, really, that maybe they've been estranged from.
yeah.
But like everybody's been woken up. Like we have to fight against evil,
Yeah.
and so that moment of them entering the battle, and the king who had been Theoden, who had been just like incapacitated and sort of like mentally overthrown, um, back to life and
Yeah.
leading his people. Yeah,
Yeah,
that gives me
seeing him
chills.
go back out.
Yeah,
Oh, it's awesome.
yeah, and all in the movies, the actors and everything.
Yeah.
It's really really well done.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. There's a million more like,
Yeah.
and even that's not even touching the
No, it
Silmarillion.
really isn't. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I know, right? And
yeah.
we didn't even like we actually didn't talk about The Hobbit either, which
No,
like
which is
it's different, but
hmm
it's also like it
it's
is
great.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But
But we don't have all the time in the world.
no,
Another time.
I'm sure all the listeners are just like, "Oh, this is great."
Skip.
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll just finish as we always
Yeah.
finish. Zach, how's God loved you lately?
Yeah. So I'm a high school teacher now. I'm not. I think I've been on since I've been teaching, but yeah, after the wedding. Anyway, um, at my high school, every first Friday of the month, we do all day adoration. Um, so every religion class goes just down to the chapel, and then we have adoration confession. And I had three students who, well, two students who had not been to a confession since middle school. They're all juniors, and one who had not been in over a year. And yeah, I just like one of them came up to me and it was just like we actually have sacrament of reconciliation is next to learn about in my class. I teach
Hmm.
sacraments, so it's coming up, and he was like, "How do I go?" and I just explained it to him. And I was like, "You're Catholic, right?" And he was like, "Yeah, I just like haven't, I've never been to confession." I was like, "You never been to confession?" And he was like, "Well, I went when I was little, but that wasn't like a real confession." And I was like,
Uh-huh.
"Well, it was, but but he hadn't been since he was like very young."
Like
And
first confession, maybe.
yeah, and um, it was it was just really really beautiful to like have both of the both two of them come up to me and like have like these like really like questions about it. They're like, "I'm nervous, I don't know what to do," and then they went and like really we're really glad that they did. So it's just like really reminders of like in the midst of I'm grading a lot right now,
Mhm.
and teaching isn't always easy. But then things like that happen, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh God, you are so good." Like
Yeah.
there's these kids who especially the boy that went for the first time since he was little. Um, like he's not like he's been far from the church, I believe,
Mhm.
and to see him like desire to go, it was just like I could have cried. It was like it just reminds me this is why I decided to teach. This is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, even though I'm not sure if I had anything to do with it, but rather I
Mhm.
got to witness it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So how about you?
Um, so we just came from the 11 o'clock mass and then donuts, but our 11 o'clock mass has been kind of blowing up lately.
Yeah.
Just that um, really big crowds of people, and it kind of keeps going up. And so just that to walk out and see a full church, and then kind of like everybody singing,
Mm,
and looking out and seeing all these people that I know, and so like old parishioners, new parishioners, it's really fantastic to see that kind of life here in my parish, and
mm,
it's really exciting. And it distracted me a little of just like, all right,
sure.
what do we do next?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I'm having in a couple weeks kind of a brainstorming
yeah. That's
meeting,
right.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so I'm looking forward to that. And but just like, yeah, God does things even, even when circumstances are hard or just busyness or tiredness, that yeah, God shows up. And so excited to see how he'll use me, but also like how he'll work in this parish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it last week actually at mass. When uh like we had 200 people that came to our wedding,
Yeah.
and it was not that full. You know,
Mhm.
like it was still like the side pews were mostly
Yeah.
empty.
Yeah.
And it's not that way at the Living Mass. So I was like, wow, there is a lot of people here right
Yeah.
now. It's awesome.
It's really good, and all the
Yeah,
donuts got eaten.
all the donuts got eaten. Can't ask for much more than that.
No, I like it. Well, to be continued.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah, I
do
guess so.
another Tolkien one down the
Yeah, I
line.
guess so. Well,
Hopefully. I don't know. We don't usually get complaints, but
someone's gonna complain
we'll
about
see.
this. Like that was
Like,
ridiculous.
what is
Yeah,
this?
this is the wrong podcast. I think we
I don't know.
should.
If we could talk about Star Wars,
That's a good point.
and we talked about Marvel too, I
Yeah,
think at
and
one point.
there's much more Christian symbolism in Lord of
Yes.
the Rings
Yeah.
anyway. But
Yeah. So read Lord of the Rings if you
do
have.
it, do it.
Just do it.
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
gonna go watch Rings of Power now. So.
All right. Thanks, Zach. See ya.
See you later.